New Zealand is the most isolated place in the world, with the nearest neighboring country being more than 1,000 nautical miles away. In this video, I'm going to take you through a 3-week road trip to find out if this country is actually as isolated as it seems, and find out what impact isolation has had. The plan is to start our journey in Kaikoura, then head to Lake Tekapo, on to Mount Cook, which is the tallest mountain in New Zealand, by the way, Dunedin, Milford Sound, Queenstown, and then finally on to Punakaiki. Through this trip, I hope to find out, has isolation been a good thing, or has it potentially hurt the country? Today I'm going to walk around the Kaikoura Peninsula. It's about 3 hours, so not a hefty hike, but will be good to get some movement. And apparently along the way there's a seal colony, so I'm pretty stoked about that because seals, any kind of wildlife, it's freaking amazing to see. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked about this. It's iconic. Something you're supposed to do while you're here. So I'm just walking along and there's this giant car park over here, which I guess is the start of the actual official trail. And I was like, why is there a group of people standing by the water? So I got a little bit close. I'm not super close right now. And I can see that there's a bunch of seals laying on the rocks, and there's people surrounding the rocks that have the seals on them. As I watched the tourists surround the seals, I couldn't help but think to myself, oh my gosh, is it gonna be like this everywhere? Anyone who spent a lot of time in nature knows that you're supposed to leave wildlife alone and not get close to them. Now, busyness is not what you'd expect when visiting the most isolated country in the world, but I was not to be deterred. You see, it took me 8 years to make this trip happen. 8 years living in Auckland, dreaming of seeing the jarring scenery of the South, but always unable to due to money, medical reasons, and of course, COVID. So now on to our next stop, Lake Tekapo, renowned for its night stars. Supposedly, you could see more stars here than anywhere else in the world, the entire world. After that last stop though, well, I'm not gonna lie that I was a little concerned about the impact of the tourists. Lake McGregor area, or I guess the Mackenzie Plains or something like that. This whole area is under severe drought. So this brownness that you see behind me, that's not normal. Normally it's like rich green. And along the way to get here, every single river that we saw was almost completely dried up. That's just the reality of New Zealand sometimes. There's extremes. Sometimes it rains a lot, sometimes it doesn't. And it's a really diverse landscape. And right now we're in a dry area, so yeah. Whether it be the inhospitality of the land or the fact that, there just wasn't a lot of amenities there, Mackenzie Basin was the most isolated stop along our route. But there were still tourists here. And so I wanted to push this. I wanted to test this. How isolated was it? Could I get away with skinny dipping? Unfortunately, we were never able to see stars, and that's not because it was touristy and busy, it's just because it was really cloudy and rainy, which is just a big part of New Zealand life. But the fact that I was able to go skinny dipping in the middle of what was supposedly a really big tourist site was a really good sign. Now, mentally speaking, I hadn't yet accepted the impact of tourism on isolation. I still wanted to go to spots and have them all to myself, and it felt like this next stop could be it. We were headed to Mount Cook, New Zealand's tallest mountain, where Sir Edmund Hillary trained to be the first person ever to climb Mount Everest in 1953. I mean, wow. If there was ever an uninviting place to keep tourists away, surely a climb into the mountains would be just that. Good morning. All right, today I'm going on the Mueller Track, which is a 7-hour hike one way up to the top of a mountain where there's a hut. Apparently people can stay there. I had not booked, so I cannot stay there. But I want to do something challenging today, and 7-hour hike sounds just about it. At the bottom of the track, it was busy. The trail is crowded. It's very crowded. Lots of people passing me both ways. But my hope was, as I started to gain more elevation, that people would start to drop off the trail. I used to get so intimidated when someone would pass me that was working that hard to get up the mountain, because I just felt like, I don't know, like somehow it wasn't good enough or I wasn't prepared enough or whatever it is. And whew, it's windy. It's definitely changed me over time. I don't give a crap. I'm still doing it. Wow. Well, just passed some girls who said 2.5 kilometers to go, so. While a hike like this is not something you can ever really be disappointed in, it was crowded. Even at the top, the whole entire hut was full.
This is Melissa, and I'm Trevor.
While on one hand, it certainly made me feel safe for what was actually my first ever solo mountain climb, I'll be honest that I was disappointed to see so many people at the top. Now, you're likely thinking to yourself, hey Daniela, this place doesn't seem isolated at all, and I totally get that. I've been showing you a ton of tourists, but I want to give you some perspective here. The South Island alone is 16% bigger than England in landmass, but it has 98% less people. What you're seeing here is summer New Zealand, where for 3 months, the number of tourists is the same as half the population of New Zealand. But 75% of the year, the country is very isolated. And I had a feeling that this next stop would give me some insight into the impact of isolation on the people and culture of New Zealand. First thing I realized when I got there was that the isolation was the reason Dunedin had a reputation. Right now, the university is out for the summer session, and they don't start school again until February 26th when March Madness in New Zealand starts, which is just like crazy traffic. And here in Otago, that's when the partying starts, because this university has got a reputation for being a party school.
Dunedin is just off the fucking rails right now, guys.
The chilly 11 degrees evening air last night was no deterrent.
Figures released by the University of Otago this week show only 11 fires in the first 3 months of the year.
I mean, just think, there's all these 18, 20-year-olds coming to the big city from their isolated communities for the first time in their life. Of course they're gonna party.
The Dunedin culture is good, like you enjoy it, like when you're down here. This is Dunedin. I'm here with...
Now, there is another way in which the impact of isolation on the people and culture of New Zealand is way better. As an example, this random guy, John Noakes, decided to paint all of the bus stops as beautiful murals because he didn't want children to get lonely and sad when it was raining and they were waiting for their buses. They just don't seem to have a chip on their shoulder like the rest of the world, and I think it's because having so few people makes it so they are constantly accountable to each other. But the third way that the New Zealand culture has been impacted by isolation, well, I'll talk about when we get to Queenstown. But first, on to Milford Sound. Now, Milford Sound was a curiosity for me. It only has 120 permanent residents. It's the least populated region in all of New Zealand, with only one small road to get in or get out. There's only one grocery store 2 hours away, and it's the most wet place in all of New Zealand, and also super close to Antarctica, which means it's super prone to road closures, snow, slips, avalanches, heavy rain. Milford Sound is the epitome of isolation. But at the same time, it was also the most popular site in all of New Zealand and was often named the 8th wonder of the world. about how they were maintaining the beauty and sanctity of the place while also taking in almost 2 million tourists per year.
This close to the shoreline.
The beauty of Milford Sound was incredible. And I learned on this trip that it actually had some people that wanted to build up the area. What was funny though is the reason why there weren't enough workers or permanent residents to actually work the facilities that they would potentially make, well, wasn't something that man decided.
Apparently, there's a myth or a legend that the goddess of death created the sandfly to make this place uninhabitable and unfriendly to be at, because sandflies they bite you and just leave you living itchy marks everywhere. And that was her way of keeping humans from destroying this beautiful wonderland.
I found it fascinating to think that this pesky bug was maintaining the isolation and beauty of Milford Sound, and those factors made it more attractive to tourists. But this next place had me puzzled. We were arriving in Queenstown, and it was pretty, I could see the attraction, but I couldn't understand how it gained itself the name, the adventure capital of the world. I mean, this is a world-known name. People know this about Queenstown. That is a hell of a reputation. Well, turns out isolation would be how it got that name.
I am standing outside New Zealand's first ever ski resort, Coronet Peak Ski Resort. So this ski resort was built in 1947. There was a guy named Harry Wigley. He was known for his economic foresight. Like, he could see that Queenstown was going to be a hub, but there was no winter tourism here. So he hired this local inventor, Bill Hamilton, to create a pulley system to get people up the mountain. This guy, Bill Hamilton, who invented the ski lift here, he's actually way more famous for inventing something else here in Queenstown that is a bit more exhilarating. Behind me in these canyons is where the jet boat operates here, which was the other invention by Bill Hamilton.
Bungee jumping, the ski lift, jet boating. These are all the result of one of my favorite parts of New Zealand culture, which is the 8-wire mindset. Basically, New Zealand was so isolated for so long with limited resources that they learned to make do. And the number 8-wire was one of the number one tools they used when they were fixing things, making things, etc. And it became celebrated to basically be resourceful and use what you have rather than constantly getting new things. So isolation had an effect, created a culture in which things were constantly being created, which eventually gained Queenstown the reputation of the adventure capital of the world. So now we are on to our last stop, Punakaiki on the northwest coast of the South Island. Now at this point, I've experienced most of the most isolated country in the whole world. I've lived on the North Island for 8 years, and I've been to the South Island several times, including this road trip. So the big question in my head is, how do they compare?
New Zealand, I love you. I love that in one day I've been able to see a cavern, a blowhole, pancake rocks. I've gone on a long, 10-kilometer hike. There's a beautiful river next to me and there's a cliff.
Geographically speaking, I was surprised at how similar the North Island and the South Island are. I mean, they both have really dense green bush, lots of waterfalls, lots of beaches. The South Island would definitely be more isolated in the off-season though. Culture-wise, I didn't really notice a big difference between the people on the North Island and the South Island. Probably the only thing that I'll note is that there's more cities and there's more big cities on the North Island than there is on the South Island. And I think that city culture is something that South Island doesn't have. In terms of price, the South Island was more expensive, but for one reason only. Generally speaking, New Zealand is more expensive in rural communities because there's lack of access. And on the South Island, there was more small towns. Now, There is one way in which the South Island is significantly different to the North Island.
Oh my god, they're all over you. Oh my goodness. It's so bad.
Oh yeah.
All over me. Alright, how are you handling them, sir?
You can't handle them. No way. There are too many,
It's that bad.
and it's so bad.
We're at Gillespie Beach, which is on the northwest coast, and the sandflies here are terrible. The minute you stop, they start swarming. I can see them start swarming right now. Oh, they're horrible.
This particular sandfly is only found on the west coast of the South Island and is way more brutal than anything I've ever experienced on the North Island.
Literally all over me. Hundreds. Yuck.
So has isolation helped New Zealand or has it hurt New Zealand? Both. And it depends what you're looking for. Isolation certainly makes life hard in New Zealand. After COVID especially, wages dropped, inflation's on the rise, and we just don't have the resources here to help the country. But for me personally, my goals were to be around a country where people were held accountable to each other and there was a sense of humanity that still existed. And that's exactly what I found here. I found a country where people, generally speaking, still value life in a way that I felt was missing in my own country. They're still able to hear each other's opinions. Not always, but more. And they make do with what they have. They're not constantly out buying new things. These are all the result of isolation. And to answer Ian's question, which island has better pies? Well, Ian, unfortunately, I am gluten-free. I am highly allergic, so yeah, I don't get to enjoy any pies. Now it's time to head back to Auckland, but I have some big things happening in the city, and it turns out I won't be staying there for long.